Now, the community of Dalibhunga informal settlement in Orange Farm are calling for strict regulations on taverns in the area after 7 people were shot dead in the early hours of Sunday morning. Amongst the deceased is a 3-year-old child. The incident has put a spotlight on child safety concerns in South Africa following incidents where women and children have been involved in the mass murders. We are going to be getting some reaction now from Advocate Brenda Madumise-Pajibo, who's the Director for Wise for Africa. A very good evening to you, Advocate. Very concerning indeed as we listened to the reactions of mothers who've lost their children, feelings of helplessness as we take stock of something that is becoming more and more prevalent. What is your reaction to this?
Listen, I think the state of violence in this country, we cannot overemphasize the stage of violence in this country. It has been with us for the longest of time and it continues unabated, right? And there are interventions, there are programs that are put in place. You're expecting that law enforcement will act swiftly. But I think at the core of all of these things is us as citizens, as residents, as individuals. What role are we playing to ensure that we have a violent-free country? Right? Why do we believe that to resolve conflict, to resolve arguments is through violence, and that you will meet the most brutal violence and meet it out on children and on defenseless and vulnerable groups? So for me, at the core of all of this is a real introspection as human beings, that are we comfortable in living in a society, in a community that is ravaged by violence, and we want to place blame on alcohol and everything else when we don't look at ourselves and understand why it's important to value another life and value our own lives. And I think until such time that we understand the value of life and why is it that we need to be on alert to ensure that we do not, one, celebrate violence when it happens and justify and excuse and give reasons why it has happened and why that justification towards it. We'll continue to have these discussions and debates and have more lives being lost precisely because we are not self-introspecting and looking at what role can I play to ensure that I have a violent-free country and a violent-free community.
It's interesting you speak about the role of community members. When we were listening into the package just played, we heard community members speaking to some of from SABC news reporters saying that the suspect who has claimed the lives of the victims was one who was unsuspecting in terms of behavior and conduct, and they could have never imagined that it would be such an individual. And of course, we're also talking and emphasizing that children have now, more and more children have now become victims of brazen and ruthless, sometimes very well organized shootings. How do communities protect their children?
And it goes back to what I raised earlier on. I think, why do we value life? Why do we believe that our children need to be protected? So when we go back to those fundamentals, why we have children and why it's important that every child lives in a free, caring society, a society that espouses values of integrity, of respect, and of love. So if we don't do that and continue to shower children with love and ensure that they are removed from harm, and when we know that there is harm and we recognize that harm, we remove them from that harm and isolate the people who are causing harm. What we tend to do in this country is to celebrate people who cause harm to others and harbor people who have caused harm to others. We know of incidences of people in communities who are perpetrators of these heinous, brutal crimes and violent crimes, but they're not willing to come forward to ensure that we really and truly live in a violence-free society and communities. So for me, where I am, and my frustration is that you do not have people who have a stake in ensuring that their lives are one that are free from this violence, and that they don't need to live in fear in their own communities because they have got nowhere else to go. And I really want to plead with ourselves as communities, as individuals. What role are we playing to ensure that we live in communities and in the areas that we can be proud of and feel safe in? And what role are you playing? I'm going to emphasize, we all play a role in encouraging with violence or encouraging that we live in a safe place. So it has to take all of us to stand up in that community to ensure that it's a crime-free society and crime-free community.
Yeah.
We can't be looking for messiahs from outside to come and help us when we know who are people in those communities who are brutalizing communities.
And this kind of behavior and these alarming incidents often and always have a ripple effect in terms of affecting people who may feel that they are now vulnerable. How do you reassure children that they are safe? How do you validate their feelings that what has happened will not happen again? Because that in itself speaks to the psychological impact of these relentless killings.
You can only validate the aspirations and really validate the children's fears by acting in such a way that they can believe that you've got their interests at heart. As long as they see you in the community not doing the right things, and children are very perceptive, right? They can see when something is wrong, and they can see when an adult is actually encouraging that kind of behavior. We can only get the confidence of the children. We can only get their respect and even the trust from them once we act and show that we are not tolerant to violence, and that they are priority in us in ensuring that the violence will stop. We can only do that by showing them. We are not going to talk ourselves out of it by just continuing to talk, but it's about acting and showing them so that they can see it, and they can feel confident and trust that things will change.
Very well. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion and speaking to us this evening. Of course, rounding up that conversation with the Director for WISE for Africa, Advocate Brenda Madumise-Pajibo.